It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the coach. A bunch of you have asked me what I think about the idea of including Muay Thai in the Olympics. Should Muay Thai be an Olympic sport? What's the deal with that? What do you think? Well, here's what I think. No. I think it's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. And here's why. You would be sorely disappointed with the outcome. If you love the sport of Muay Thai. If you don't care, you don't care. But if you love the sport of Muay Thai, you do not want that sport in the Olympics. Consider what happened to other combat sports in the Olympics. Think about Taekwondo for a minute. Once upon a time, Taekwondo was a deadly serious killing system. Well, there was a serious martial art where people trained seriously to seriously kick and punch each other in serious ways, right? But then something happened. They made it an Olympic sport, and they added a bunch of rules. No punches to the head. And that may have had something to do with the fact that boxing was already an Olympic sport. And if you include another sport where punches to the head happen, it's a little too similar, right? The IOC has this habit of trying to differentiate the sports so that they are different enough to merit being in the Olympics in the first place, right? So in Taekwondo, you can win by points, by kicking the body, kicking the head, you score points for that, or by knockout. If you knock your opponent out, you win in Olympic Taekwondo. But for a very long time, since Taekwondo has been included in the Olympics, because of that rule set, you can kick the head, kick the body, punch the body, and basically nothing else. It looks kind of weird. It's a weird-looking sport. The fighters hop around with their hands down by their sides, trying to bait the other guy into throwing a head kick so they can counter more efficiently, and it just looks strange. And a lot of the times, the fighters try to rack up the points, doing some goofy stuff that really has no bearing on practical fighting or self-defense or anything like that, and they milk the rules. Sometimes they win through an honest knockout, but a lot of the times they don't, and because of that, people have made fun of Taekwondo for a very long time. All these karate fighters, man, I remember when I was training in Taekwondo and all these folks with their karate black belts and their smug attitudes were like, Taekwondo sucks. Have you seen the Olympics? I have. It's not like karate. Karate's badass. We would never let that happen to our sport. And yet, if you were not in the know, if you were hiding under a rock during the Olympics, even if you didn't watch the events, you probably heard about this. If you exist somewhere in a martial arts community, karate is now an Olympic sport, and it is now an Olympic sport where you can become a gold medalist by getting knocked out. Yeah, because knockouts, unlike Olympic Taekwondo, are not a legitimate way to win in karate. So if you love the sport of karate, if you were one of those guys who prided yourself on your karate being far superior to that wimpy Olympic Taekwondo, well, guess what? Your sport just got bastardized. Now I realize that a lot of karate competitions are run under the same rule set. Light contact, no knockouts, knockout or excessive force equals disqualification, etc., etc. But nobody liked what happened. Let's be honest. Nobody liked the fact that the guy who won the gold medal is the one who got knocked out. Nobody's happy about that. I don't think the guy who got knocked out is happy about that. That's not how he wanted to win. Nobody wants to win like that. So, getting back to Muay Thai. Muay Thai is the national sport of Thailand. Every serious mixed martial artist cross-trains in Muay Thai because it's important. It's one of the most effective, most efficient striking systems out there. That just goes without saying. But if they brought Muay Thai into the Olympics, what would they do? They would change it. They would reduce it to the safest possible amateur version of the sport. So they would wear a bunch of pads, headgear, chest protector, elbow pads if they allowed elbows at all, knee pads if they allowed knees at all, shin guards, extra big gloves. They Might take out the elbows, might take out the knees, might take out the clinch altogether, might say no more sweeps, no more takedowns. And it would turn into a crappy version of kickboxing. And it would also get confusing because you'd think, well, we already have 2 crappy versions of kickboxing in the Olympics. And now we have a third? And other people want to add savate into the Olympics, and then they would turn that into a crappy version of kickboxing, into a watered-down version of savate as well. And everybody else wants their national martial art in the Olympics. At least they think they do. They don't, but they think they do. And then what would we have? A whole bunch of crappy, watered-down amateur kickboxing events with minor differences in the rules where people are winning gold medals for getting beat up. That's what would happen. If you love your combat sport, keep it out of the Olympics. How many judo practitioners do I know? Quite a few who lament the fact that judo became an Olympic sport. I mean, there's the pros and there's the cons. The pros, it gets mainstream attention. Sort of. Once every 4 years, it gets some attention. But is that the same as mainstream attention? There are a couple of mainstream sports in the Olympics. We've got soccer or football, depending on what country you're from. We've got basketball. We've got baseball. In the United States, those are mainstream sports. Soccer or football, mainstream sport throughout most of the world. But then if you look at the rest of the Olympic sports, are those mainstream? I mean, let's just read through some of these. Man. Artistic gymnastics. I mean, I love gymnastics. It's a fun sport to watch. But is that a mainstream sport? Not really. Artistic swimming, synchronized swimming, not really a mainstream sport. Badminton, it's a fun game. Some people take it very seriously. Most people don't. What else? BMX freestyle. Biking, it's cool. It's a neat sport. There's a lot of merit to it, but is it a mainstream sport? No, it's not. Kayaking, canoeing, I mean, these are all great sports. Equestrian, diving, fencing, handball, etc., but they're not mainstream sports. And handball, for example, being in the Olympics. Handball is an Olympic sport. How many of you, by raise of hands, play handball? I don't. I don't even know the rules of handball. I don't even know what handball looks like. I've never seen a game of handball. It's in the Olympics. I've never seen it. I didn't even know handball was an Olympic sport until I went to the internet and typed in what are the events in the current Olympics. And handball was in there. And I was like, how about that? I didn't even know. So can we really argue that being in the Olympics makes it mainstream? No, not really. In fact, I worry that Muay Thai becoming an Olympic sport would make it less mainstream. Simply because it would make people think that's a crappy version of kickboxing. Boo, let's not do that. I mean, think about what happened to wrestling. Wrestling, the oldest and greatest martial art of all, right? It was an original Olympic sport. And there were several different iterations of wrestling that came about and came and went in the modern Olympics. The first wrestling event in the modern Olympics was called amateur wrestling, which was actually catch as catch can. It was catch wrestling. It was submission grappling in the Olympics. But that didn't last very long, and there was a French dude who decided, you know what, my form of wrestling, Greco-Roman wrestling, which is actually a French sport, by the way. It was not the style practiced in the ancient Greek Olympics. It was not the style practiced by the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans. That's just what it was called. But he won the favor of the Olympic Committee and got his version of wrestling included in the Olympics. And freestyle wrestling became an Olympic sport at some point. So we had these two wrestling sports in the Olympics. Now I think it's just one form of wrestling in the Olympics. They changed the rule sets, tried to make it more understandable and relatable to the audiences, because a lot of people were confused by the rule set of freestyle and Greco-Roman wrestling. Like, okay, I understand you have to pin the guy, but wait a minute, why are they starting in the parterre position? or whatever the heck that's called. I don't understand this. Why did that guy just score 2 points? Why did that guy score 3 points? Why is there a penalty happening here? The audiences, by and large, the people who didn't wrestle, who didn't participate in wrestling in high school or college, were kind of confused. And so wrestling was taken out of the Olympics and then later reintroduced with a modified rule set to try to make it more mainstream. And has it worked? You tell me, is wrestling mainstream in your country? In some countries it is, like Mongolia, wrestling is a big deal. In Kazakhstan, man, every person I know from Kazakhstan knows how to wrestle. They just have wrestling gyms all over the place there. Most of the guys I know from Russia, from Ukraine, from these former Soviet countries know how to wrestle. Is it mainstream there? I don't know how mainstream it is, but a lot of dudes there know how to wrestle. In America, you'll see wrestling in high school. You'll see it in colleges. Outside of that, not really. So in that regard, is it mainstream? Sort of. It's widespread, but not mainstream. There's a difference, an important difference. Muay Thai is widespread, but it's not mainstream. In Thailand, it's mainstream, yeah. It's the national sport, once again. Worldwide, it's well known, it's widespread, it's not mainstream. Is the Olympics going to help that? No, I don't believe it will. What do you think? Would you like to see Muay Thai in the Olympics? Would you like to see your martial art in the Olympics? Would you like to see Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in the Olympics? I think that one could actually work. Specifically because the IBJJF rule set is already so watered down as it is. It's already so focused on the safety of the participants to the point where they have a 86-page rule book, unless they've rewritten it, which they probably did. It's probably like 90 or 100 pages now. Haven't read the rule book for a few years, but it's long, man. It is long, it is dense. So I don't really see the Olympics making jiu-jitsu that much worse than it already is, man. IBJJF tournaments, it's about as exciting as watching paint dry. It's exciting to compete in them, but watching other people compete in them, pass. Pass on that, man. Thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.